A single father walks into a shelter with no plans of adopting until he sees a small, trembling dog with deformed front legs. The staff warns him, "This dog is too much work, too broken, too much of a burden." But something in his son's eyes changes, and despite every warning, he takes the dog home. What he doesn't know is that this decision will set off a chain of events that no one could have predicted. Because this dog isn't just another stray. He's about to change their lives in ways they never imagined. What makes this dog so different? And why was the shelter so desperate to keep him from finding a home? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Leo sat on the cold concrete steps of Mountain View Middle School, his shoulders hunched against the autumn wind. The last students had left 20 minutes ago, their excited chatter fading into the distance. He pulled his worn backpack closer, trying to make himself smaller. Inside his office across town, Daniel Carter stared at his computer screen, fingers flying over the keyboard as he responded to urgent emails. The clock on his desk caught his eye, 3:45 p.m. His heart jumped. "Leo," he muttered, quickly shutting down his computer. He grabbed his jacket and rushed past his coworkers, calling out a hurried goodbye. The drive to school felt endless. When Daniel finally pulled up to the curb, his stomach twisted at the sight of his son sitting alone. Again. He'd seen this scene too many times. "Hey, buddy," Daniel said as Leo climbed into the car. A yellow slip of paper poked out of Leo's backpack. Another note from Mrs. Thompson. Daniel didn't need to read it to know what it said. Leo's teacher had been sending the same message for weeks. Not participating, too quiet, needs to engage more. Daniel sighed, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "How about we make a quick stop before heading home?" Leo just nodded, staring out the window. The local animal shelter was a small building with peeling paint and a weathered sign. Daniel hadn't planned this. It was a spur-of-moment decision. Maybe seeing some animals would cheer Leo up. Inside, the smell of cleaning supplies mixed with pet food. Barking echoed through the hallways. They walked past kennel after kennel, but Leo showed little interest in the energetic dogs jumping at the gates. Then he stopped. In the corner kennel, a small dog with unusual front legs lay curled up on a blanket. His front paws bent at odd angles, and he trembled slightly as Leo approached. The nameplate read Max. "This one's been here a while," a shelter worker said, coming up behind them. Her name tag read Sarah. "His front legs are deformed. Makes it hard for him to walk properly. We've had 3 families try to adopt him, but..." She shook her head. "He needs special care. No one's been able to handle him." Daniel opened his mouth to move them along, but Leo's voice, barely above a whisper, stopped him. "I don't mind." Daniel looked at his son in surprise. Leo stood closer to the kennel now, his fingers gently touching the wire mesh. Max had lifted his head, his brown eyes fixed on Leo with an intensity that made Daniel pause. "Leo," Daniel started, uncertainty in his voice. "Please, Dad." Leo turned to him, and Daniel saw something he hadn't seen in months, a spark of hope in his son's eyes. 20 minutes later, Daniel found himself signing adoption papers, still not quite sure how they'd gotten to this point. Sarah brought Max out in her arms, the dog whimpering softly at the movement. When she placed him in Leo's waiting arms, something changed. Max's trembling stopped as Leo gently stroked his fur. The dog leaned into the touch, resting his head against Leo's chest. They seemed to understand each other without words, 2 souls recognizing something in each other that others had missed. Daniel watched them, his hesitation mixing with a strange feeling of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this unexpected decision would turn out to be exactly what they needed. Daniel eased the car out of the shelter's parking lot, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror every few seconds. In the back seat, Leo sat perfectly still as Max tried to find his balance on the leather seats. The small dog's front legs splayed awkwardly, and he let out a soft whimper with each bump in the road. "Maybe we should have gotten a carrier," Daniel muttered, wincing as Max slipped again. "He's okay," Leo said softly, steadying the dog with gentle hands. "I've got him." When they pulled into their driveway, Daniel helped Leo lift Max from the car. The dog's nails clicked against the concrete path leading to their front door, his movements uncertain and wobbly. Inside, Max's struggles became more apparent. The hardwood floors might as well have been ice for all the traction he could manage. His deformed front legs slid out from under him as he attempted to walk, and he dragged himself forward with determined little huffs. Daniel watched as Max bumped into the coffee table, then the couch, his heart sinking. The shelter worker's words echoed in his mind. He needs special care. Maybe they weren't equipped for this. Maybe this was too much responsibility, too much work. But before Daniel could voice his concerns, Leo was already moving. Without a word, his son began pushing the coffee table against the wall, creating a wider path. He rolled up the decorative rug to make a straight runway from the living room to the kitchen. One by one, he shifted chairs and moved obstacles, all while Max watched with attentive eyes. "There," Leo said, stepping back to survey his work. The living room looked different now, less decorated but more navigable. Max attempted another walk, this time with more space to maneuver. He still struggled, but there were fewer collisions. As night fell, they settled Max into the crate the shelter had provided, padding it with soft blankets. Daniel helped Leo position it next to his bed, and they said goodnight. Hours later, soft whining broke the silence of the house. In his bed, Leo stirred at the sound. Max's cries were quiet, but persistent. His small body curled awkwardly in the crate. Leo slipped out from under his covers and padded across the floor. The crate door opened with a gentle click. Max immediately crawled forward, his awkward legs carrying him straight into Leo's lap. The dog let out a deep sigh as he settled, his whole body relaxing as Leo's fingers found their way into his fur. "I don't mind," Leo whispered in the darkness, repeating the words he'd said at the shelter. Max's tail thumped softly against his leg in response. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows as Leo poured his cereal. Max lay nearby, his front legs splayed on the cool tile floor. Every few minutes, the small dog would attempt to follow Leo's movements, dragging himself forward with determined grunts. Daniel leaned against the counter, coffee mug in hand, watching as Max struggled to keep up with his son. The dog's nails scraped against the floor, his efforts making Daniel's chest tighten with worry. But Leo seemed to sense Max's determination. He slowed his pace, kneeling down every few steps to offer gentle words of encouragement. "Good boy, Max. You're doing great." After breakfast, they ventured into the backyard. The morning dew made the grass slick, and the uneven ground proved even more challenging than the indoor floors. Max's deformed front legs trembled as he tried to navigate the terrain. He took a few wobbly steps before tumbling forward. Leo was there instantly, helping him up. Max tried again, his small body shaking with effort, only to fall once more. Mrs. Peterson from next door peered over the fence, her face pinched with concern. A few other neighbors had gathered for their morning walks, stopping to watch the scene unfold. "That poor creature," Mrs. Peterson called out. "He needs professional care, you know? It's not right to let him struggle like that." Daniel felt his stomach knot. Maybe they were in over their heads. Maybe Max needed more than they could provide. He opened his mouth to call Leo inside, but stopped when he saw his son's focused expression. Leo hadn't even looked up at the neighbor's comments. He remained crouched beside Max, speaking in soft, encouraging tones. "Try again, buddy, you can do it." The day passed with more attempts, more falls, and more quiet encouragement from Leo. By dinner time, Daniel had made a decision. As they sat at the kitchen table, he cleared his throat. "I think we should look into getting some help with Max," he said carefully. "Maybe find a trainer who knows about special needs dogs. We could also get a vet's opinion on what might make things easier for him." Leo looked up from his plate, hope brightening his eyes. He nodded eagerly. Through the window, they could see Max in the backyard, attempting once again to stand. His legs wobbled beneath him, but this time he managed to stay upright for several seconds before sitting down with a soft plop. Leo's face broke into a wide grin, and for the first time in a long while, Daniel saw real joy in his son's eyes. The next morning, Daniel clipped a new blue leash onto Max's collar. The small dog sat attentively, his ears perked up despite his awkward posture. Leo stood nearby, bouncing slightly on his toes with nervous energy. "Just a short walk," Daniel said, trying to sound confident. "We'll take it slow." They made their way to the small park at the end of their street. The moment they stepped onto the sidewalk, Max tried to move forward. His deformed front legs couldn't support his weight, and he tumbled forward, his chin hitting the pavement with a small thud. Leo was at his side in an instant. "Max, are you okay?" A couple walking their golden retriever passed by, their whispers carrying clearly in the morning air. "That poor thing shouldn't be out here," the woman said, shaking her head. "It's cruel, really?" The man with her nodded. "Some dogs just aren't meant for normal lives." Leo's shoulders tensed at their words, but he remained focused on Max. He knelt down beside the dog, his voice soft but steady. "It's okay, buddy. We can try again." Max looked up at Leo, his tail giving a small wag. Leo helped adjust his position, and they started again. This time, Max moved more cautiously. His front legs dragged along the ground as he figured out how to balance his weight, but he kept going. One step, then another. Each movement was clumsy and awkward, but Max's determination showed in every attempt. His tail continued to wag, even as he struggled. "Look, Dad," Leo whispered excitedly. "He's doing it!" Daniel watched as his son matched Max's pace perfectly. The leash slacked between them. Leo didn't pull or rush. He simply walked beside his dog, offering quiet words of encouragement with each step. They didn't make it far, just to the edge of the park and back. But by the time they reached their driveway, Max was panting from the effort. His fur was slightly damp with sweat, but his eyes were bright and alert. Leo knelt down next to Max, wrapping his arms gently around the tired dog. "You did so great," he murmured into Max's fur. Daniel stood back, watching the scene unfold. Something clicked in his mind as he observed their bond, the way Leo's usually tense shoulders relaxed when he was with Max, how his quiet voice carried strength when encouraging his dog. He realized that Max wasn't just a dog who needed saving. Maybe, in a way, Leo needed saving too. The morning sun filtered through the living room windows, casting warm patches of light across the floor. Daniel walked in with his coffee mug and paused, surprised to find Leo already awake and sitting cross-legged on the carpet beside Max. An old spiral notebook lay open in front of him, its pages covered with rough sketches and scribbled notes. "What's all this?" Daniel asked, bending down to get a better look. Leo's pencil moved quickly across the paper as he added another detail to his drawing. "I was reading about dogs with disabilities online," he explained, his voice quiet but eager. "Some people make special equipment to help them walk better." He held up the notebook, showing a simple diagram of what looked like braces attached to tiny wheels. Max lay beside him, his chin resting on Leo's knee. tail thumping softly against the floor. Daniel studied the drawing more closely. "And you think we could make something like this?" Leo nodded, his fingers absently stroking Mac's fur. "Maybe not exactly like the ones I saw, but something to help him balance better." Daniel took another sip of his coffee, considering the sketch. "Come with me to the garage. I think we might have some stuff we can use." In the garage, they gathered supplies. Some Velcro straps from Daniel's old tool belt, a beaten-up skateboard Leo had outgrown, and foam padding from an old package. Leo's hands trembled slightly with excitement as they laid everything out on the workbench. Together, they cut the foam into strips and attached them to the Velcro. Daniel showed Leo how to measure twice before cutting, making sure the straps would fit Mac's legs properly. The skateboard wheels were too big, but they managed to salvage some smaller casters from an old office chair. When they brought their creation inside, Mac sniffed it curiously. Leo carefully strapped the makeshift brace onto Mac's front legs, double-checking each adjustment. "Okay, buddy," he whispered. "Let's try this." Max pushed himself up, wobbled, and immediately toppled over onto his side. The brace was too loose on one side and too tight on the other, throwing off his balance completely. Leo's shoulders slumped. "It didn't work." Daniel placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Hey, nothing works perfectly the first time. That's why we keep trying." They spent the rest of the afternoon making adjustments. By evening, Leo sat on the floor again, carefully readjusting the straps while Max waited patiently. The dog's tail wagged as Leo tightened the last strap. "Ready?" Leo asked softly. Max pushed himself up again. This time he managed 3 wobbly steps before stumbling. But instead of falling completely, he caught himself and took 2 more steps. Leo's entire face lit up. "Did you see that, Dad? He's trying." His voice carried a note of wonder Daniel hadn't heard in months. Daniel watched his son lean forward, completely absorbed in making tiny adjustments to the brace. Leo's usual hesitancy was gone, replaced by focused determination. It struck Daniel that this was the most engaged he'd seen Leo in months. Leo shuffled through the crowded school hallway on Monday morning, his shoulders hunched and his eyes fixed on the scuffed linoleum floor. The weekend with Max had been great, but now reality pressed in around him like a heavy blanket. His backpack felt too heavy, filled with homework he'd barely managed to finish. A sudden jolt knocked him off balance. His backpack slid from his shoulder, hitting the floor with a thud. Laughter erupted behind him. "Hey, Carter!" Jake Thompson's voice rang out. "Still hanging out with that broken dog?" More snickers followed. Leo's cheeks burned as he bent down to pick up his backpack, his hands trembling slightly. He could feel their eyes on him, waiting for a reaction. In Ms. Peterson's English class, Leo slid into his seat near the back, trying to make himself as small as possible. The teacher stood at the front, writing on the whiteboard in her neat handwriting. Personal Narrative Project, Overcoming Challenges. "Everyone has a story to tell," Ms. Peterson explained, her voice cheerful. "I want you to write about a challenge you faced or witnessed, and how it was overcome." Leo's mind immediately jumped to Max, his wobbly steps with the brace, his determination to keep trying despite falling. His pencil hovered over his notebook, but doubt crept in. Would anyone even care about a story about a disabled dog? They'd probably just laugh, like Jake and his friends. The cafeteria buzzed with conversation at lunch, but Leo sat alone at his usual corner table. He picked at his sandwich without much appetite, his notebook open beside his tray. Almost without thinking, he began sketching Max. First the way he looked when they'd met him at the shelter, then with the brace they'd made. His pencil moved quickly, adding details of Mac's floppy ears and the way his tail wagged even when he struggled to walk. The sounds of laughter and chatter faded into background noise. For the first time that day, Leo didn't feel completely invisible. Max would be waiting for him at home, excited to see him no matter what happened at school. When the final bell rang, Leo practically ran the whole way home. He burst through the front door, and Max's excited bark greeted him immediately. The dog was already wearing his brace. Dad must have put it on before leaving for work. Leo dropped his backpack and sat cross-legged on the floor. Max wobbled over to him, his movements still awkward, but more confident than before. He made it all the way to Leo before stumbling slightly, catching himself with a determined look on his face. "Good boy," Leo whispered, scratching behind Max's ears. He watched as Max pushed himself up again, taking a few more unsteady steps across the living room floor. Despite the clumsy movement, Max's tail wagged the whole time, and his eyes shone with determination. A small smile tugged at Leo's lips as he watched. Maybe he did have a story worth telling after all. The evening sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk as Leo and Daniel took Max for his usual walk. Max had been doing better with his brace lately, managing longer distances without too much trouble. His tail wagged as he shuffled along, front legs moving in their awkward but determined way. Suddenly, Max's legs gave out completely. He let out a sharp yelp that made Leo's heart stop. The dog crumpled to the ground, whimpering in a way they'd never heard before. "Max!" Leo dropped to his knees beside him, hands hovering uncertainly over his friend's trembling body. "What's wrong? Dad, something's wrong." Daniel quickly knelt down to examine Max, who continued to whine softly. "Don't move him, Leo. Let me look." His father's gentle hands carefully touched Max's legs and brace, but even the lightest contact made Max flinch. "We need to get him home," Daniel said, his voice calm but urgent. With careful movements, he scooped Max into his arms. The small dog went limp, his eyes squeezed shut in pain. Leo's hand shook as he unclipped the brace, following close behind his father as they hurried home. "Is he going to be okay? Please tell me he'll be okay." Back at the house, Daniel laid Max in his bed. The dog curled up immediately, tucking his nose under his paw. When Leo brought Max's food bowl over, the dog turned his head away, something he'd never done before. "This is all my fault," Leo whispered, his voice cracking. "I pushed him too hard. I should have known better." He sat cross-legged beside Max's bed, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Tears welled up in his eyes as he watched his friend lying there, barely moving. Daniel stepped out of the room to call the vet, speaking in hushed tones. Leo could hear fragments of the conversation, words like rest and monitor and wait and see. When his father returned, he explained that the vet thought Max had probably strained himself and needed time to recover. They should watch him carefully and bring him in if he got worse. Leo nodded numbly, not moving from his spot beside Max. He reached out to stroke the dog's fur, his touch feather-light. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice thick with tears. "I just wanted to help. I didn't mean to hurt you." As night fell, Leo remained by Max's side. Daniel brought him a pillow and blanket without saying anything about bedtime. The house grew quiet, with only the soft sound of Max's breathing breaking the silence. Leo's eyes grew heavy as he lay on the floor next to Max's bed. Just as he was starting to doze off, he felt something warm and wet on his hand. His eyes flew open to find Max weakly licking his fingers. It wasn't much, just a small gesture, but it made Leo's heart leap. He wiped his eyes with his free hand and leaned closer to Max. "We're not giving up," he whispered firmly. The morning was crisp and clear as Daniel helped Max into the car. Leo sat in the back seat with him, keeping one hand on Max's side for comfort. The little dog trembled slightly, whether from pain or nervousness, Leo couldn't tell. At the veterinary clinic, the waiting room smelled of antiseptic and pet food. Max huddled close to Leo's legs while they waited. When the nurse called them in, Leo carried Max carefully into the examination room. Dr. Martinez, a kind-faced woman with silver-streaked hair, examined Max thoroughly. She paid special attention to his deformed front legs, gently manipulating them while Max whimpered softly. "The braces you made show real ingenuity," she said, studying the homemade supports. "But Max needs something more structured to prevent strain on his joints." She pulled out a tablet and showed them pictures of professional mobility aids. "See how these distribute the weight more evenly? That's what we need to aim for." Leo leaned forward, his eyes wide as he absorbed every detail. He noticed how the professional braces had additional support points and used different materials than what they'd tried. The doctor explained about proper angles and pressure points, and Leo wished he had his notebook to write it all down. Back home, Leo went straight to his computer. He opened dozens of tabs, watching videos of dogs with similar conditions to Max's. Some used wheelchairs, others had custom braces, and a few showed before and after footage that made his heart race with possibility. "Dad!" he called out, waving Daniel over to look at the screen. "Look at this one. They used a different kind of joint here." He pointed to a specific part of a mobility aid. "And these straps are better than what we used." Leo grabbed his notebook and started making lists. Materials they'd need, measurements to take, techniques to try. His handwriting, usually messy and rushed, was careful and precise. Each item was marked with stars for importance and little notes in the margins. Daniel watched his son work with an intensity he'd rarely seen before. When Leo showed him the complete list of supplies, Daniel nodded. "We can go to Henderson's Hardware on Saturday," he said. "They'll probably have most of what you need." As evening approached, Leo sat cross-legged on the floor next to Max's bed. He carefully adjusted the old braces, trying to implement some of what he'd learned that day. Max stayed still, trusting as Leo tightened a strap here, loosened another there. "We'll get it right this time," Leo promised softly, scratching behind Max's ears. The dog responded by licking his hand, tail thumping gently against the floor. For the first time since they'd started this journey, Leo felt truly confident. Not just hopeful, but certain they would succeed. Saturday morning arrived with golden sunlight streaming through the windows. Leo triple-checked his notebook before heading out, making sure he hadn't forgotten any measurements or material specifications. Daniel watched as his son carefully tucked the notebook into his backpack, treating it like a precious treasure. At Henderson's Hardware, the bell chimed as they walked in. The store smelled of fresh lumber and metal, with rows of tools stretching down every aisle. Leo pulled out his notebook, his fingers tracing the detailed drawings he'd made. "Excuse me," he said to the clerk, his voice stronger than usual. "I need some supplies for a mobility aid I'm building for my dog." The clerk, a woman with kind eyes named Sarah, leaned over the counter to look at Leo's sketches. "These are impressive drawings," she said. "Tell me more about what you're trying to build." Leo's face lit up as he explained his project. His words flowed easily as he described Max's condition and showed her the improvements he wanted to make. Daniel stood back, amazed at how his usually shy son spoke with such confidence when talking about helping Max. They moved through the aisles, gathering supplies. Leo carefully selected lightweight plastic sheets that would provide better support than their previous attempt. He found stronger straps that wouldn't dig into Max's skin, and wheels that would roll more smoothly than the old skateboard parts they'd used before. As they waited in line to check out, an elderly man behind them noticed Leo's sketches. "That's quite a project you've got there, young man," he said, peering at the notebook. "What's it for?" Leo explained about Max, his voice growing more animated as he described their progress and setbacks. The old man listened intently, nodding along. "You know," he said, reaching for his wallet and pulling out a business card, "there's a pet rehabilitation center over on Maple Street. My daughter works there. They might have some good ideas for you." Leo accepted the card carefully, his eyes scanning the address. "Thank you, sir," he said, tucking it safely into his notebook. Back home, Leo spread their new supplies across the living room floor. Max watched curiously from his bed as Leo began modifying the braces. The new plastic molded better than their previous materials, and the straps attached more securely. When the modifications were complete, Leo called Max over. The dog approached cautiously, remembering their previous attempts. Leo fitted the improved braces carefully, making small adjustments until everything sat just right. Max stood still for a moment, testing the feel of the new supports. Then slowly, he took a step forward. The wheels rolled smoothly, and the better balanced frame helped him stay steady. Another step followed, more confident than before. Leo's face broke into a wide grin. "We're getting there," he said, watching Max take a few more steps around the room. The following Monday, Daniel pulled into the parking lot of the Maple Street Pet Rehabilitation Center. The building looked modern, with large windows and a wheelchair-accessible ramp leading to the entrance. Leo held his notebook tightly as they walked in, his eyes widening at the sight before them. The center bustled with activity. A golden retriever paddled in a blue hydrotherapy pool while a therapist guided its movements. Nearby, a German shepherd practiced walking with a specialized wheelchair, its back legs supported by the frame. In another corner, a small terrier wore advanced leg braces that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Leo moved closer to the pool area, watching in amazement as the golden retriever's muscles strengthened with each guided stroke. Daniel noticed how his son's eyes darted from one piece of equipment to another, taking everything in. "Welcome to our center," a warm voice greeted them. A woman in a white coat approached, her name tag reading Dr. Collins. "How can I help you today?" Leo pulled out his notebook, showing her the sketches of Max's braces. "We're trying to help our dog walk better," he explained, his voice steady despite his usual shyness. "Someone told us you might be able to help." Dr. Collins studied Leo's drawings with genuine interest. "These are quite impressive," she said, leading them to a workstation where various mobility aids were displayed. She picked up different types of braces, explaining the benefits of each design. "See how this joint moves," she demonstrated with a professional-grade brace. "It allows for natural movement while providing support." She showed them materials they hadn't considered: lightweight metals, specially designed hinges, and ergonomic padding. Leo scribbled frantically in his notebook, hanging on every word. Dr. Collins watched him with approval, answering his questions about weight distribution and pressure points. She brought out a model that looked similar to Leo's design, but with key improvements. "You're on the right track," she told him, adjusting the model to show how it could be modified. "The basic principle you used is sound. We just need to refine it a bit." Before they left, Dr. Collins disappeared into a supply room. She returned with a small bag filled with specialized padding material. "Try this for comfort," she said, handing it to Leo. "It's designed specifically for sensitive areas." Leo accepted the bag carefully, holding it close as if it contained gold. His eyes shone with renewed determination, already imagining how he could use the material to make Max more comfortable. Morning arrived with golden sunlight streaming through the kitchen windows. Leo knelt on the floor next to Max, carefully adjusting the new braces they'd created with Dr. Collins' help. The specialized padding felt soft but sturdy under his fingers as he secured each strap. Max sat patiently, his brown eyes watching Leo's every move. His ears twitched nervously as Leo attached the final pieces, the smooth rolling wheels they'd chosen at the rehabilitation center. "You got this, buddy," Leo whispered, running his hand gently along Max's back. The dog's tail gave a tentative wag. Daniel stood nearby, coffee mug in hand, watching as Max took his first uncertain steps with the improved braces. The wheels turned silently on their new bearings, and the lightweight frame supported Max's chest perfectly. Each movement seemed easier than before, more natural. Step by step, Max gained confidence. His paws found their rhythm, and the wheels responded smoothly to each motion. Soon, he was moving faster, almost trotting down the sidewalk. His tail wagged with growing enthusiasm as he realized how much easier it was to keep up with Leo. Daniel couldn't help but smile as he watched them from the front porch. Mrs. Thompson, their next-door neighbor who had once suggested they return Max to the shelter, stopped watering her flowers to stare. Her expression changed from surprise to admiration as Max practically pranced past her garden. Other neighbors emerged from their houses, drawn by the sight of Max's transformation. Mr. Rodriguez, who used to shake his head in pity, gave Leo a thumbs up. Even the jogger, who always crossed the street to avoid them, stopped to watch. As they reached the local park, Max's excitement peaked. His tail wagged furiously as he navigated the smooth pathway with newfound grace. A group of kids playing nearby noticed them and came running over. "Wow! What are those?" a small girl with pigtails asked, pointing at Max's braces. Instead of shrinking away as he usually did, Leo stood tall. His voice was clear and confident as he explained how the braces worked, showing them the special wheels and padding. The children listened intently, their faces filled with wonder. "Can he play with us?" another kid asked. Leo nodded, smiling as Max soaked up the attention, his tail never stopping its happy movement. The dog that nobody had wanted, that everyone had given up on, was now the center of amazed and delighted attention. Monday morning brought a different kind of energy to Leo's steps as he walked into Mrs. Peterson's classroom. His usual hunched shoulders were straight, and his eyes held a quiet determination. The familiar weight of his backpack felt lighter somehow, filled with the video footage he'd captured of Max over the weekend. Mrs. Peterson stood at the front of the class, her chalk tapping against the board as she wrote, "Overcoming Challenges, Due Friday," in neat letters. "Remember, class," she said, turning to face the students, "your presentation should focus on real-life examples of perseverance." Leo nodded to himself, his hand automatically reaching for his notebook where he'd sketched out his project plans. The other students shuffled papers and whispered among themselves. But Leo remained focused, already seeing in his mind how he would tell Max's story. When lunch period arrived, Leo headed straight for the computer lab instead of the cafeteria. He pulled out his phone, connecting it to the computer to transfer the videos he'd taken. The screen filled with clips of Max, struggling with his first steps, falling down, getting back up again, and finally moving smoothly with his new braces. Leo's fingers moved quickly across the keyboard as he pieced the footage together. He barely noticed when the first bell rang, signaling the end of lunch. With permission from his teacher, he stayed in the library, completely absorbed in his work. A small group of students lingered near his computer, drawn by the sounds coming from his headphones. Among them was Tyler, who usually led the hallway taunts. But today, instead of sneering, he watched with genuine interest as footage of Max learning to walk played across the screen. "Is that your dog?" Jenny Martinez asked, leaning closer to see better. Leo nodded without looking up, his eyes fixed on the screen as he adjusted the timing of a transition. More students gathered around, watching as the story of Max's transformation unfolded through Leo's careful editing. "That's actually pretty cool," Tyler admitted, his voice lacking its usual edge. For the first time in his school life, Leo didn't feel invisible. He felt the weight of their attention, but it wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It felt different, like recognition rather than judgment. That evening, Leo sat cross-legged on his bedroom floor, his laptop casting a soft glow across the carpet. Max lay beside him, his new braces set carefully aside for the night. The video project was coming together exactly as Leo had imagined it. He reached down to scratch behind Mac's ears, smiling as the dog leaned into his touch. "You're going to change everything," he whispered softly. Max lifted his head and placed it gently on Leo's lap, his brown eyes looking up with complete trust. The steady thump of his tail against the floor seemed to echo Leo's own growing confidence. Leo's fingers moved across the keyboard well past his usual bedtime. The soft glow of the computer screen illuminated his determined expression as he carefully pieced together the final moments of Mac's story. Each clip was a precious memory. Mac's first attempt to stand with the makeshift braces, his frustrated whimpers when they didn't work, and the triumphant moment when he finally took his first steady steps at the rehabilitation center. He watched the footage one last time, making sure every important moment was there. The struggles, the setbacks, and most importantly, the victories. With careful consideration, Leo typed out the final message against a black background. "Never give up. No matter how many times you fall." Max slept peacefully beside his desk, his chest rising and falling with each breath. Leo reached down to pat his head, double-checking his work one last time before saving the file. The next morning, Leo's hands trembled slightly as he handed the USB drive to Mrs. Peterson. She smiled warmly, inserting it into her computer and projecting it onto the whiteboard. "Class, we're going to watch Leo's presentation first today," she announced. The room darkened as the video began to play. Leo sat rigid in his chair, his heart pounding as the first images of Max appeared on screen. The footage showed Max at the shelter, trembling and uncertain, his deformed front legs tucked beneath him. As the story unfolded, the usual whispers and rustling of papers fell away. Even Tyler, who typically spent class throwing paper airplanes, sat transfixed. They watched as Max struggled with his first steps, saw Leo's early attempts at making braces, and witnessed the countless falls and setbacks. When the scene of Mac's breakthrough at the rehabilitation center played, someone gasped. The footage showed Max, confident and steady with his new braces, almost trotting through the park. Leo had captured the moment perfectly. The way Max's tail wagged, the joy in his movements, the freedom in his stride. The final message appeared on screen. White letters against black. "Never give up. No matter how many times you fall." For a moment after the video ended, the classroom remained completely silent. Leo held his breath, staring at his desk. Then, from somewhere in the back, a single person started clapping. Another joined in, then another. Within seconds, the entire class erupted in applause. Leo looked up, surprised to see his classmates standing, their faces bright with genuine smiles. Jenny Martinez wiped a tear from her cheek. Even Tyler was clapping enthusiastically, nodding at Leo with newfound respect. For the first time since he could remember, Leo felt truly visible. Not as the quiet kid who sat in the back, but as someone who had done something that mattered, something that touched people's hearts. Leo stepped out of the classroom, his heart still soaring from the unexpected applause. The usual weight on his shoulders felt lighter, as if something had shifted inside him. For once, he wasn't trying to make himself invisible as he walked down the hallway. But the feeling didn't last long. Jake and his friends were waiting by the lockers, their faces twisted into familiar sneers. Jake pushed himself off the wall, blocking Leo's path. Well, look who thinks he's special now," Jake said, crossing his arms. "Got everyone crying over some broken dog video?" Leo clutched his backpack straps tighter, his stomach nodding. The other students passing by quickly looked away, pretending not to notice. "What? You think you're some kind of hero now?" Jake continued, stepping closer. "Nobody really cares about your stupid dog. They'll forget about you by next week." Before Leo could react, one of Jake's friends yanked his backpack off his shoulders and tossed it down the hallway. Books and papers scattered across the floor as students walked past, some stepping on his things without bothering to stop. "Go fetch," Jake laughed. "Just like your pathetic dog." Leo's hands curled into fists, his nails digging into his palms. The familiar anger bubbled up inside him, hot and demanding. But then an image flashed through his mind. Max, struggling to stand after falling, never giving up, never letting the setbacks stop him. Leo took a deep breath. His hands slowly unclenched. "I don't care what you think," he said quietly, his voice steady. Jake blinked, clearly thrown off by the calm response. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Leo walked past them, heading toward his scattered belongings. He could feel their stares burning into his back. But for the first time, he didn't hunch his shoulders or try to make himself smaller. He just kept walking. That evening, Leo sat cross-legged on his bedroom floor, Max's head resting in his lap. The dog's breathing was soft and steady, his new braces set carefully beside the bed. As Leo stroked Max's fur, something settled in his chest, a quiet understanding. He thought about the classroom applause, about standing up to Jake, about all the times he'd felt small and invisible. Max shifted in his sleep, making a contented sound. Leo smiled, realizing that he wasn't just stronger because of Max. He was stronger because he finally believed in himself. The next day, Leo gathered his books after class, ready to head home to Max. But before he could leave, Ms. Thompson called out to him. "Leo, could you stay for a moment?" He paused, his stomach doing a small flip. Even though the class had loved his presentation, old anxieties died hard. Ms. Thompson smiled warmly as he approached her desk. "Your project was incredible, Leo. The way you showed Max's journey, how you captured every step of his progress. It was beautiful." "Thank you," Leo mumbled, his cheeks warming at the praise. "The principal wants to talk to you." Leo's heart skipped a beat. The principal's office? His mind raced through everything he might have done wrong, but Miss Thompson's smile remained encouraging. "Don't worry," she said, noticing his expression. "It's nothing bad. In fact, I think you're going to like what she has to say." Walking to the principal's office felt like moving through a dream. Leo's palms were sweaty as he knocked on Mrs. Garcia's door. "Come in, Leo," she called out. Inside, he found not just Mrs. Garcia, but also Max, who was lying contentedly on a blanket near her desk. His tail thumped against the floor when he saw Leo. "Have a seat," Mrs. Garcia said, gesturing to the chair across from her. "I hope you don't mind that I asked your father to bring Max. I wanted to meet him in person after seeing your video." Leo sat down, relaxing slightly as Max scooted closer to rest his head on his shoe. "Your project has gotten quite a bit of attention," Mrs. Garcia continued. "Not just from students, but from teachers, too. We've actually been discussing something for a while now, a therapy dog program for the school." She leaned forward, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. Some students struggle with anxiety, stress, or just feeling alone. A friendly dog can make such a difference. Your story with Max, it's exactly the kind of thing that could help us make this happen. Leo listened, hardly daring to believe where this was going. "Would you be interested in presenting your story to the school board? They're meeting next month to discuss new programs, and I think hearing about Max from you could really help convince them." Leo's mouth went dry. Present to the school board? Just months ago, he could barely answer questions in class. The thought of standing in front of a room full of adults made his heart race. He looked down at Max, who gazed back at him with complete trust. His dog, who never gave up despite how hard things were, who kept trying even when everyone said he couldn't do it. If he can do hard things, so can I, Leo thought. That evening, Leo sat at the kitchen table, pushing his peas around his plate. Daniel noticed his son's unusual quietness. "Everything okay, buddy?" Daniel asked, setting down his fork. Leo took a deep breath. The principal wants me to present Mac's story to the school board. She thinks it could help start a therapy dog program. Daniel's eyebrows rose, and a proud smile spread across his face. But then he noticed Leo's tense shoulders and worried expression. That's amazing, Leo. But are you sure you're ready for this? Talking in front of a room full of adults isn't easy. I don't know, Leo admitted softly. Max nudged his leg under the table, and Leo reached down to scratch behind his ears. Over the next few days, Leo threw himself into preparation. He spent hours in his room, standing in front of his mirror, index cards clutched in his trembling hands. Max showed us that disabilities don't define. Leo practiced, then shook his head and started over. The words felt stiff, rehearsed. Daniel helped when he could, sitting on Leo's bed as an audience of one. Project your voice more, he suggested gently, and remember to breathe. But no matter how many times Leo practiced, doubt kept creeping in. During dinner, his stomach churned with worry. What if he got up there and forgot everything? What if his voice shook so badly they couldn't understand him? Worst of all, what if they listened to everything he had to say and still said no? The night before the presentation, Leo sat cross-legged on the living room floor. Max lay beside him, his modified braces sitting nearby. Leo watched as his dog pushed himself up, determination clear in every movement. Max walked across the room, his gait still a bit wobbly, but so much stronger than before. His nails clicked against the hardwood floor, each step purposeful, despite the difficulty. Leo watched him, remembering all the falls, all the times Max could have given up, but didn't. You don't give up, he whispered, reaching out to stroke Max's fur when the dog returned to his side. He took a deep breath, feeling some of his anxiety melt away. So I won't either. A few days later, Leo stood outside the school board meeting room, his hand trembling as it gripped the blue folder containing his notes. Through the glass panel in the door, he could see them. 7 adults in formal suits, seated behind a long mahogany table. Their faces looked stern and serious as they reviewed papers in front of them. Max sat quietly beside him, his modified braces gleaming under the fluorescent lights. While Leo's heart thundered in his chest, Max seemed completely at ease, his tail wagging gently against the hallway floor. "Leo Carter," the secretary called, opening the door. "They're ready for you." Leo swallowed hard and stepped into the room, Max following steadily beside him. The click of Max's braces against the tile floor seemed impossibly loud in the quiet room. 7 pairs of eyes turned to study them. "Good afternoon," Leo began, his voice barely above a whisper. He cleared his throat and tried again, but the words caught. His prepared speech suddenly felt distant and foggy in his mind. Then he felt it, Max's warm presence against his leg, that familiar gentle pressure. Leo looked down at his dog, who gazed back with complete trust. This was Max, who had fallen countless times, but never stopped trying, who had shown him what real courage looked like. Taking a deep breath, Leo started again. "This is Max," he said, his voice stronger now. 6 months ago, nobody wanted him. The shelter said he was too much work, too broken to be worth saving. As he spoke, Leo's nervousness began to fade. He told them about those first difficult days, about the homemade braces and the falls. He described how Max's determination had inspired not just him, but other students who had seen his video. "Max taught me that being different doesn't mean being less," Leo continued, his voice growing more confident. "Some students struggle with anxiety like I did. Some feel invisible or scared. A therapy dog program could help them feel seen, understood. Max showed me that everyone deserves a chance to prove their worth." The board members listened intently, some taking notes. One woman leaned forward, watching Max demonstrate his mobility with the braces. When Leo finished speaking, silence filled the room. His heart began to race again as the board members exchanged glances. Had he said enough? Had he said too much? Finally, one of the board members, a man with silver-rimmed glasses, leaned forward. "That was impressive," he said thoughtfully. Another member, the woman who had been watching Max so closely, nodded in agreement. "We'll discuss this further, but you've given us something to think about." It wasn't exactly a yes, but it wasn't a no either. Leo felt something warm spread through his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. Pride. Real pride, not just in Max, but in himself. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen windows as Daniel prepared breakfast, expecting to hear the familiar click of Max's braces against the floor. But the house remained unusually quiet. Walking to Max's bed in the living room, Daniel found the dog curled up tightly, his food bowl untouched from the night before. "Hey, buddy," Daniel said softly, kneeling beside him. Max's tail gave a weak thump, but he didn't lift his head. When Daniel reached out to stroke his fur, Max let out a small whimper. "Leo!" Daniel called up the stairs, trying to keep his voice steady. "Can you come down here?" Leo thundered down the stairs, his face bright with excitement about the upcoming school day. But his smile vanished when he saw Max. "What's wrong with him?" Leo's voice trembled as he dropped to his knees beside Max's bed. The dog's eyes were dull, missing their usual spark. When Leo tried to help him stand, Max yelped in pain. "We need to get him to Dr. Collins," Daniel said, already reaching for his car keys. "Now." The drive to the veterinary clinic felt endless. Leo sat in the back seat with Max's head in his lap, whispering words of comfort that seemed to do nothing to ease the dog's distress. Dr. Collins was waiting for them when they arrived, her face creased with concern as she examined Max. Her gentle hands moved carefully over his front legs, while Max whimpered softly. "His front legs have been under a lot of strain," she finally said, straightening up with a sigh. "We knew this could happen. He might need to rest for a while." She paused, her expression growing more serious. "Or he may never be able to walk as well again." Leo's face went pale. His hands, still stroking Max's fur, began to shake. All the progress they'd made, all those hours of practice and adjustment, all Max's determination, it couldn't end like this. That evening, the house was quiet except for the soft sound of Max's breathing. Leo sat cross-legged on the floor beside Max's bed, gently running his fingers through the dog's soft fur. The moonlight cast long shadows across the room as tears began to roll down Leo's cheeks. "You fought so hard," he whispered, his voice catching in his throat. Max's eyes, though tired, stayed fixed on Leo's face. "I don't want this to be the end." Max shifted slightly, pressing his cold nose against Leo's hand. The gesture, so familiar and gentle, made Leo's tears fall faster. A soft whimper escaped Max's throat as he nuzzled closer to Leo's touch. Leo sat at the kitchen table, his laptop open and surrounded by books from the library. His eyes were tired from reading, but he couldn't stop. Every few minutes he glanced at Max, who lay sleeping in his bed nearby, and his determination grew stronger. "There has to be something," he muttered, clicking through another website about mobility aids for disabled dogs. Pictures of specialized braces and custom wheelchairs filled his screen. Some dogs were running, playing, even swimming with their new devices. Leo's heart beat faster with each success story he found. Daniel watched from the doorway, coffee mug in hand, as his son scribbled notes and bookmarked pages. He'd never seen Leo so focused, so driven. Even after yesterday's devastating news, Leo hadn't given up. Instead, he'd woken up early, asking to go to the library before school. "Dad, look at this," Leo called out, turning his laptop around. This dog had the same problem as Max, but they made him these special braces with shock absorbers and everything. Daniel moved closer, studying the image. The braces looked far more sophisticated than anything they'd managed to create at home. "That looks pretty advanced, buddy." "I know, and look, there's this specialist in the city who makes custom mobility devices." Leo clicked to another tab, revealing a professional website with before and after photos of dogs running and playing. Daniel pulled up a chair beside his son. "I can make some calls," he said, pulling out his phone. He spent the next hour talking to various specialists while Leo continued his research. Finally, Daniel hung up after his last call. "I found someone who might be able to help," he said. "But Leo—" He hesitated, watching his son's eager face. "It's expensive. These custom devices, they cost thousands of dollars." Instead of deflating, Leo's eyes lit up. "We could have a garage sale," he exclaimed, already grabbing his notebook. "And I read about this website where people can donate to help with stuff like this. It's called crowdfunding." He began writing furiously, making lists of items they could sell, drafting messages for a fundraising page. "We could share Max's story, show everyone how hard he's trying. Maybe the school would help too, since they're interested in the therapy dog program." Daniel watched in amazement as Leo's plan grew, filling page after page with ideas. His son wasn't just making a list, he was building hope. "And you know what, Dad?" Leo looked up, his eyes bright with purpose. "This isn't just about Max anymore. There are probably lots of other dogs like him, dogs that people gave up on. If we can show it's possible to help them—" He trailed off, looking at Max, who had woken up and was watching them with those trusting eyes that had captured Leo's heart at the shelter. "Maybe we can change how people think about dogs with disabilities," Leo finished softly. "Maybe we can help them all get a chance." Mrs. Peterson noticed Leo's fundraising notes during third period and asked him to present them to the class. Her encouraging smile gave him a small boost of confidence. Drawing courage from thoughts of Max waiting at home, Leo stood before his classmates, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped his notebook. Though his voice quivered at first, he found his strength and spoke confidently about Max's need for special braces, explaining how they would help his beloved dog walk normally. His classmates listened with surprising attention, even former bully Tommy, who sat up straighter in his chair. When Leo mentioned his garage sale idea, others began jumping in with enthusiasm. Sarah's hand shot up, offering her mom's famous chocolate chip cookies for baking sales. Marcus, tech-savvy as always, suggested setting up online fundraising pages. More ideas bubbled up from Jenny, Carlos, and, to everyone's amazement, Tommy himself. As Mrs. Peterson filled the whiteboard with suggestions, nearly every student in class raised their hand to volunteer their help, their faces bright with excitement. The campaign took off like wildfire. Sarah coordinated weekly bake sales that filled the school with tempting aromas. Marcus expertly managed their growing social media presence, and Jenny's artistic posters appeared everywhere, from classroom walls to local coffee shops. The shelter's heartfelt sharing of Max's story attracted support from unexpected corners of the community. Supportive messages and donations poured in from people across town who felt inspired to help or shared stories about their own special needs, pets. The campaign was touching hearts far beyond what Leo had imagined possible. In Leo's living room, which had transformed into a bustling campaign headquarters, volunteers worked diligently managing donations and sending updates, while Max watched contentedly from his bed, tail wagging at all the attention. Leo looked around at the scene, his heart swelling with gratitude for the community that had rallied behind his mission to help one special dog. Leo sat cross-legged on his bed, his laptop balanced precariously on his knees. The fundraiser page glowed on the screen as he clicked refresh yet again. The numbers had grown impressively over the past weeks. $2,847 raised so far. But they still needed another $1,000 to reach their goal for Mac's custom mobility device. His heart sank as he looked at the countdown timer. Only 5 days left. Max lay beside the bed, his makeshift brace showing signs of wear. The dog's recent setback meant they needed the professional equipment soon. Leo scratched behind Max's ears, trying to push away his growing anxiety. "Hey, buddy," Daniel called from the doorway. "I've been thinking, why don't we try talking to some local businesses? Many of them support community causes." Leo's stomach tightened at the thought of approaching strangers, but he nodded. Max needed this. The next morning, armed with photos of Max and information about the fundraiser, Leo and Daniel visited shops along Main Street. At first, Leo let his dad do most of the talking. But as shop owners listened with genuine interest, his confidence grew. Mrs. Martinez from the bakery immediately pulled out her checkbook. The hardware store owner, who remembered them from their Brace building supplies runs, posted the fundraiser link on the store's popular social media page. By afternoon, Leo had found his voice. He spoke passionately about Mac's journey, showing pictures of the dog's progress. Some businesses couldn't donate money, but offered their windows for posters. Others shared the fundraiser with their customers. Just as they were heading home, Leo's phone rang. It was Dr. Collins from the Rehabilitation Center. Her voice bubbled with excitement. "Leo, you won't believe this," she said. "Someone just called the center. They want to remain anonymous, but they're covering all the remaining costs for Max's mobility device." Leo's hands trembled so much he nearly dropped the phone. His eyes welled up with tears as Dr. Collins explained the details. They could order Max custom equipment right away. Back home, Leo rushed to Max's side, dropping to his knees beside the dog's bed. Max's tail thumped against the floor as Leo wrapped his arms gently around him. "We did it," Leo whispered into Max's fur, his voice thick with emotion. "You're getting your wheels." The specialist's office was bright and welcoming, with photos of happy dogs covering the walls. Leo and Daniel stood nervously as Dr. Martinez wheeled out Max's new mobility device. It was beautiful, gleaming metal framework perfectly sized for Max's body, with sturdy wheels and comfortable padding where it would connect to his chest and legs. Max sat patiently as doctor. Martinez showed them how to properly fit the wheelchair. His ears twitched with curiosity as she adjusted the straps and checked all the measurements. The device was nothing like Leo's homemade braces. This was professional-grade equipment designed specifically for Mac's unique needs. "There we go, Doctor," Martinez said, stepping back. "Everything's secured properly now." Max sniffed at the wheels, his nose twitching as he investigated this strange new addition to his body. He shifted his weight uncertainly, trying to figure out how to move. Leo knelt beside him on the floor, getting down to eye level with his dog. His hand gently stroked Max's head, offering comfort and encouragement. "You've got this," he whispered softly, his voice full of confidence, even as his heart raced with anticipation. Daniel unclipped the leash, giving Max the freedom to move as he wished. For a moment, Max just stood there, his body tense with uncertainty. Then, hesitantly, he took one step forward. The wheels rolled smoothly across the floor. Max's eyes widened in surprise. He took another step, then another. The wheelchair moved effortlessly with him, supporting his weight perfectly. Suddenly, something clicked. Max's tail began to wag, picking up speed as he realized what he could do. He took a few more steps, faster this time. The wheels responded perfectly to his movements. Before anyone could blink, Max was trotting around the room, moving with more speed and grace than he'd ever managed before. His tail wagged furiously as he zoomed past them, making a complete circuit of the office. His eyes sparkled with pure joy as he discovered his new freedom. Leo laughed out loud, the sound mixed with happy tears that he quickly wiped away. "You're really doing it, buddy," he said, watching as Max continued his excited exploration of the room. For the first time since they'd adopted him, Max wasn't struggling to keep up or fighting against his own body. He was truly, completely free. Leo's phone buzzed during lunch, making him jump. When he saw it was the principal's office, his stomach did a flip. The secretary's voice was friendly, but gave nothing away. "The board members are here with their decision. Can you come down now?" Yes, Leo managed, his voice barely a whisper. He glanced at Max, who sat beside his desk in his wheelchair, ever present and calm. The dog had become a familiar sight at school over the past weeks, accompanying Leo while they awaited the board's decision. Walking down the long hallway felt like moving through water. Each step seemed to take forever. Max rolled along beside him, the soft whir of his wheels on the floor tiles oddly comforting. His tail wagged steadily, completely unaware of how important this moment was. Leo's hand trembled as he reached for the office door handle. Inside, the board members sat in their usual formation, a row of serious faces and business attire. Their expressions gave nothing away. The chairperson, Mrs. Henderson, adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat. Leo held his breath. Max sat perfectly beside him, his presence steady and reassuring. "We've reviewed your proposal thoroughly," Mrs. Henderson began, her voice formal. "We've also observed Max's interactions with students over these past weeks." She paused, and Leo felt his heart might burst from his chest. "After careful consideration and seeing the remarkable impact Max has had on both you and your fellow students, we've decided to approve a therapy dog program at the school." Leo blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "Furthermore," she continued, a small smile finally breaking through her professional demeanor, "we would like Max to be our first official therapy dog. His story and your dedication have proven that this program can make a real difference." The words slowly sank in. They'd done it. They'd actually done it. Leo glanced down at Max, who wagged his tail harder, picking up on his human's excitement, even if he didn't understand why. Mrs. Henderson went on to explain the details, training requirements, schedules, protocols, but Leo could barely focus. His mind was spinning with the reality that Max, the dog nobody wanted, would now be helping other students find their voice, just as he'd helped Leo find his. When they stepped out of the office, Leo felt like he was floating. The hallway seemed brighter somehow, filled with possibility. He knelt down next to Max, who immediately pressed closer, his wheels shifting slightly on the smooth floor. "We did it, Max," he murmured softly. Max responded by licking his hand, enthusiastically, as if to say, "Of course we did." 3 weeks after the board's decision, Leo walked through the school entrance with Max trotting beside him in his wheelchair, now sporting a bright blue therapy dog vest with the school's logo. The vest had arrived yesterday, and Leo had spent nearly an hour making sure it fit perfectly over Max's mobility device. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows in the hallway. It was the same corridor Leo had walked countless times before, but everything felt different now. Students who had once looked right through him now smiled and waved. A group of younger kids stopped to ask if they could pet Max, and Leo nodded, showing them the right way to approach. "He likes it when you scratch under his chin," Leo explained, his voice clear and steady. The children's faces lit up when Max leaned into their touch, his tail wagging happily. Even Trevor and his friends, the boys who had tormented Leo for so long, stood silently by their lockers. They watched as Leo walked past, his head held high, Mac's wheels clicking softly against the floor. There were no sneers, no shoves, no cruel comments, just quiet observation of the boy who had proven them all wrong. At home that afternoon, Daniel was organizing some old papers when he came across a photograph that made him pause. It was Leo from just 6 months ago, standing alone at a school event. The image showed a different boy entirely. Shoulders curved inward like he was trying to disappear, eyes fixed on the ground, hands stuffed deep in his pockets. The loneliness in the photo was almost tangible. Daniel glanced through the window to where Leo sat in the backyard, helping Max practice a new command for his therapy work. His son's back was straight, his movements confident as he demonstrated the hand signal again and again. When Max got it right, Leo's laugh rang out clear and joyful. The transformation was remarkable. The difference wasn't just in Leo's posture or the way he carried himself. It was in his eyes. They were bright now, focused, alive with purpose. It was in his voice when he spoke up in class or explained Mac's story to curious strangers. It was in the way he walked down the street, no longer trying to hide from the world. As evening settled in, Leo and Max made their way to the front porch. The sky had cleared after a cloudy day, revealing a blanket of stars overhead. The neighborhood was quiet except for the gentle whirring of crickets and the occasional distant car. Leo sat on the top step, and Max settled beside him, his wheelchair positioned carefully so he could rest comfortably. The dog's vest lay folded neatly inside, ready for tomorrow's adventures. Leo reached over and scratched behind Mac's ears, exactly where he liked it best. "I don't mind," Leo whispered into the peaceful night, echoing the words he'd said so long ago at the shelter. Max shifted, laying his head in Leo's lap with a contented sigh. They sat there together, two beings who had once been overlooked, now finding their place in the world. If you enjoyed the story of Leo and Max, I handpicked this next story that you will love. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.